Well, thanks for stopping by. I'm Emma Dickinson. I was the first school teacher in Missoula. And this is my grave site here and my family around me. When I was 30 years old, I was living out east in Delaware. And I was not married. And so at that time, if you weren't married by the time you were 30, you were pretty much like, forget it. So my brother had been traveling out west for like 17 years, my brother John. And he wrote a letter home and he said, come out west. I'm living now in a beautiful place called the Bitterroot Valley. Come and visit. Maybe you'll like to stay out here. And I thought, well, why not? I'm 30 years old, single. So I went, and my younger brother went with me. We caught a train down to Sioux City, and then from Sioux City we caught a boat to Fort Benton, Montana, where my brother was waiting for us. Well, the boat trip took longer than I expected. It was supposed to take 3 weeks. It took 6 weeks. My brother is sitting there for 3 weeks waiting for us. Can you imagine how he felt? He was probably wondering if we were dead or alive. And actually there was a close encounter on the way. We were on the boat. A war party of Crow Indians forced their way on the boat and said they wanted to ride with us upstream for a ways. Well, they had just had an encounter with a Sioux Indian party, and they had captured 2 of their squaws, brought them with them on our boat. They also had many scalps that they brought on with them. And so we were pretty scared, and I was the only woman except for the captain's wife on this boat. So we sort of stuck next to her husband the rest until they got off the boat. And they stayed on the boat for 3 days and 3 nights, ate our food. None of us slept during that whole time. And 3 days later they got off. So they never bothered us, but that was pretty scary, very scary. And then another exciting thing that happened was, you know, when you're out east, you hear about all the buffalo. And so we were waiting and waiting to see buffalo. And one day, there was a herd of buffalo that swam across the Missouri River right in front of our boat. We had to actually stop and wait. I bet there were thousands of them. It was so exciting. Beautiful animals. One of the men shot 1 buffalo, and we had buffalo meat for dinner that night. It was so good. So that was exciting, but that boat trip did get tiring. They were constantly hanging up on sandbars, and that's what took so long. Sometimes it took days for the men to get us off the sandbars. So when we reached Fort Benton, I was very happy to see my brother, and he was very happy to see us, that we were okay. And then from Fort Benton, he took my brother and I to, in a wagon pulled by mules all the way to the Bitterroot Valley. And when we passed through what is now Great Falls, there was no settlement there at all at that time. This was 1869. And then when we went through where Helena is, there was just a small mining camp. And I lived to be 88 years old. I died in 1924. So I saw a lot of changes and a lot of growth in Missoula and Montana. But I'll never forget when we were traveling across to the Bitterroot Valley, all the wildflowers that spring were so beautiful. And it was a long trip from beginning to end. It was 2.5 months that I had been traveling, and it was not an easy trip, but I'll never forget it. It was very exciting. Well, when I got to the Bitterroot Valley, the people in that community needed a teacher for their children, so they asked me to teach, and they were going to pay me $90 a month. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good. Okay, I'll do that. And my brother took me into Missoula because I had to get the certificate, the teaching certificate from the judge in Missoula. Well, the judge happened to also be the superintendent of schools in Missoula. And he said, well, we need a teacher here. We'll pay you $100 a month. So I said, okay, I'll take it. I mean, that was a pretty quick raise, huh? Well, that's how I ended up being the first teacher in Missoula. And the first schoolhouse was on East Front Street. If you know where Family First is now, evidently that was the original spot where the first schoolhouse was. So I had 14 students the first year. Some came from Frenchtown, some came from Stevensville area, and then some from out in the country, but most of them came from the Missoula area. Small community. I knew the Higgins and the Greenos and the Wardens, and we were all friends. Had a very nice community. I was very involved with, I actually started the first Protestant church. It was a Presbyterian / Methodist church, and always stayed very involved in the schools. I taught for 3 years, and then I got married, 1871. And at that time, once a woman got married, she could not teach anymore by law. And I was very excited to get married because one of the things I had thought about when I came out west was that there probably weren't very many women, and maybe a lot more men, and maybe I could actually get married and have a family, even though I was getting pretty old. Well, we did get married, and we had 5 children. So that was wonderful. 2 of my children did die at a very young age, and if you look behind my tombstone here, those are the 2 grave sites for the 2 children that died, one as an infant and one when he was 5 years old. Of course, that was a tragedy, but in those days it happened a lot to a lot of people. So I did have 3 surviving children, and they all went to the University of Montana, and it was in Helena at that time, so I was very proud of them. It was very difficult being courted by my future husband because you could not be seen with a man. Couldn't even go down to the ice cream parlor by yourself. You had to have an escort. And if I ever left town, I had to have a male escort.
And permission of chairman of the board. Give me a break. Bordering at ice cream stores, I love it.
Yep.
This
It's okay.
the rest of
Thank you.